Call the meeting to order. Good evening. My name is John Samia, and I'm the chairman of the Shrewsbury Board of Selectmen. On behalf of my fellow board members in the town manager's office, I want to welcome you to our March 8th, 2022 Board of Selectmen meeting. Tonight's live broadcast is being brought to you by Mark Sierra of the Shrewsbury Media Connection. In addition to tonight's live broadcast on channels 30, 330, and Facebook, tonight's meeting will be rebroadcast on channels 30 and 330 from tomorrow until our next regularly scheduled meeting on March 22nd, 2022. In addition, tonight's meeting will be available via the Shrewsbury Media Connection on YouTube starting tomorrow, and all of our previous meetings are available on the same platform. First item on the agenda is to approve bills, payrolls, and warrants.
Move approval.
Second. Have been moved and seconded, and all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Next item is to approve minutes of February 11th, 2022, February 18th, 2022, and February 22nd, 2022.
Move approval.
Second.
Have been moved and seconded, and all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is announcements and reports. Colleagues, any announcements? I have a few. Actually, I have a bunch of them. Shrewsbury Small Business Grant Assistance Program. The Planning and Economic Department is accepting applications for Shrewsbury Small Business Grant Assistance Program between now and April 1st, 2022. The grants will provide immediate relief to Shrewsbury small businesses that have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The town's American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, allocated $50,000 in funding for this program. An individual amount of up to $2,500 will be awarded to eligible small businesses. Small business owners can visit the Planning and Economic Development Department website to submit an application for the grant. Next item is Community Preservation Committee Public Forum. The newly formed Shrewsbury Community Preservation Committee is hosting a public forum on March 29th from 3:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. in the Shrewsbury Public Library meeting room. The committee is seeking your feedback on Shrewsbury's needs as related to open space, protection, historic preservation, affordable housing, and outdoor recreation. Your comments will be incorporated into the Community Preservation Plan, which will outline the committee's overall community resources, needs, and goals for each focus area. Reach out to the Planning and Economic Development Department to learn more. Then a call for town meeting members. Town meeting members are needed in all precincts. Now is the time to get involved in representative town meeting, the legislative body in the town of Shrewsbury. Any qualified candidate, a registered voter in Shrewsbury, may have their name placed on the ballot by pulling and filing nomination papers with the town clerk. The deadline to file signed nomination papers is 5 p.m. on March 15th, 2022. Town meeting members require a minimum of 10 signatures of registered voters in their precinct. Visit the town website, shrewsburyma.gov, for more information on the 2022 annual town election and how to run for town meeting member in your precinct. Next item is the National Community Survey. The second phase of the National Community Survey has begun. To take the survey, please visit poll code polco.us/Shrewsbury OP 2022. Your participation is important. National Community Survey asks questions of the community on certain service and topic areas. Overall, the survey will assist the town in the strategic planning process and other future endeavors. Your participation and engagement is important. There are flyers available at this meeting at Town Hall and online, or scan the QR code to take the survey. And finally, scholarships. Applications are now available for the 2022 Town of Shrewsbury scholarships, and completed allocations are due at the board. It doesn't have the date here, so we'll have to come back to it. Oh, Thursday. Board of Selectmen's office no later than 4 p.m. this Thursday. Scholarships are awarded to deserving residents of Shrewsbury who are seniors at any high school. Awards are based on financial need, character, community service, and academic achievement. That's it for announcements and reports. Next items on the agenda are town manager's report and then the COVID-19 updates. Mr. Mizikar.
Good evening, board members and everyone present. I'll just go right into the COVID-19 update, which is some good news. So since March 19th of 2020, there's been 7,232 positive cases in the town, with 54 cases reported since February 22nd, 2022, the board's last meeting date. The near-term trend is much more favorable, 28 cases in the last 7 days, and the town will continue to report cases and vaccination data out every Friday. All town office buildings are open to the public without appointment being necessary. Board members, I mentioned a couple meetings ago that the state is in the process of updating death certificates. It's with great sadness that I report 7 additional deaths indicated from COVID-19, raising the total in the town of Shrewsbury up from 80 to 87 since last reported at your February 22nd meeting. As for the trend curve, obviously very favorable on the right-hand side of the screen, indicates that the most recent surge is now much, working its way back down to the bottom of the curve, which is good, which is where we were last summer. And we're looking for great optimism this spring. This is further illustrated in this data set. You can see in the early aspect of January, we're up to 261.1 cases per 100,000 residents, and we're back down to 11.8 cases per 100,000 residents, which puts us well below even the average that we were experiencing in the early fall. So appreciate everyone's attention to the matter. Unfortunately, we don't have updated vaccination data for this week. This is the same that was reported at your most recent meeting, but updated data will be provided to everyone in the public this Friday. And finally, report on the percentage of cases within each age bracket, which are shown on the screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are about this report.
Any questions or comments? Being none, we'll move to the next item under meetings. Meeting with Donald Koski, Treasurer and Clerk, Shrewsbury Sportsman's Club, Inc., 307 Boylston Street, for a change of hours to the club all alcohol pouring license from 8 a.m. to 2, I believe that's a.m., Monday through Saturday, correct? And 11 a.m. to 1 a.m. on Sunday, to Monday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 2 a.m., and 11 a.m. to 1 a.m. on Sunday. So, Mr. Koski, come on up. Yeah. Good evening.
Hi,
you could introduce yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, there was a mistake on the liquor license. So instead of being 2 a.m. in the morning, it closed the bar at 2 p.m. So it's more of a correction.
Okay. So the only change is to reduce hours of operation in the morning. So you're moving it up from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Is that the only change?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions?
It is AM, not,
Correct. Right now, Donnie, it's 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. currently.
Yes. No. 11 to 2 a.m. is what it should be, yeah.
Okay.
Not
but,
2 p.m. Yeah.
Right. But current operations are 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. Monday through Saturday.
Well, not really. I just kept a bigger window open. The operations don't really run that early in the morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, the only change is to shorten the hours from 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. to 11 a.m. to 2 a.m., or do you close it? You don't close at 2 p.m., right?
Yeah, right. We want to keep 2 a.m. as the closing date. Yeah, we don't open that early, though.
Okay. So the only change is to, any questions? Is there a motion?
Move approval as the application indicates with the correction made by the applicant.
second.
Have been moved and seconded, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Next item, under new business, to review and act on the land disposition agreement with Civico Development for 1-7 Maple Avenue, the former Beale School. On December 7th, 2021, we had a public hearing at which we heard feedback from the community, and we heard 3 major themes: that there was a request for increase in open space, increase in public parking, and decrease in the number of apartments from the proposal that was presented at the December 7th, 2021 hearing. And at our January 25th, 2022 meeting, we directed Mr. Mizikar to move forward with negotiations with an LDA to work within those parameters. Hand it over to you, Mr. Mizikar. Sure. To update on the process and talk about the LDA.
All right. Thanks, Taylor. So, board members, I just wanted to walk through our plan presentation for this evening. There's 7 key areas, well, 6 key areas that we'll get through, and then with that, we'll have updated the board from your previous direction and our conversations on the 25th, and the board will then have the opportunity to obviously ask any staff questions and deliberate on this matter as you see fit. I'll walk through the planning process, the approach that has been taken for this project in the town center, implementation of that planning process, the response to the December public hearing, address areas of concerns that we've seen thematically, both from that hearing and in email correspondence that we've received. I'll present a couple project options based upon the board's directive on the 25th and the negotiations that have ensued since between staff and the developer, and I'll make a recommendation to the board this evening. So Taylor, if you could just move ahead one slide. So we're using a industry standard or best practice for a project like this, led through the Planning and Economic Development Department and associated town staff. Decisions are refined over time based upon our master plan. Our master plan is our primary land use document. And as we begin to narrow the focus on geographic aspects of the community, we refine the master plan into an area plan and ultimately down to a project plan when we have the opportunity to have public projects, whether it's infrastructure, redevelopment, or a public-private partnership, or advise the private sector on redevelopment or development in the community. So Taylor, if you could just go ahead a slide. So whenever we think about these aspects and we build upon the various levels of our planning efforts, we seek public input throughout the entire process. And as the plan moves from the master plan level to the project plan level, and the process is refined over years, which is the case in many public sector projects, no one will be surprised that we move slowly and diligently when we take these things on. We move from kind of visionary, what do you want to see in the town? What do you want to see in an area? How can we bring that vision into a strategic, in a strategic direction to make the residents' vision happen? And then we finally get down to that project plan where we move from the strategic to the tactical level and actually make things happen, ensure infrastructure is in place, work with developers, and bring kind of the bricks and mortars together and bring plans to fruition. So if you could go ahead a slide. So how does that apply here to this project? So obviously the master plan is the master plan. It's our single most important land use planning document. We built upon that document. The master plan, which was the most recent one, commissioned in 2016, it's normally a 20-year document, cited the revitalization and requested increased vibrancy in the town center. So we built off that master plan document and really focused in on the town center. It was one of our key steps. So that work brought to fruition more detailed planning, public visioning sessions, and ultimately led to some work on 1 through 7 Maple Avenue, which is, of course, the project that's here this evening for your consideration. So if you could go ahead a slide. So when we work through the master plan to an individual project plan, the outcomes that come from those things really solidify and kind of lock us in at the lower level of the foundation into the area plan, and then finally down. And the project is ultimately commissioned and signed off on through the planning board process and the issuance of various permits from the Department of Public Works and the building inspector. So Taylor, if you could just move ahead. So if you kind of put it all together, when we look at this, we applied, local government, industry best practices through the development of 3 tiers of planning, relevant process, public engagement throughout, public input throughout. And we're here kind of nearing the final phase in the tactical and strategic aspects. This project's a little bit unique, obviously. There's a strong public role. This is a public redevelopment process with town-owned land. So if the board were to move forward tonight, it's not the end of the process. It moves into the realm of the planning board where site plans and permits would be considered. So with that, I'd like to stop and kind of dive in a little bit deeper about the master planning process and the town center study that was done. And I'll turn it over, if I may, Mr. Chair, to Mrs. Lass, who will take us through the master plan process that was conducted.
Please do, Mrs. Lass.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mizikar. My name is Kristen Lass. I'm the Assistant Town Manager for Community Development and Health and Human Services. And just wanted to give the members of the Board of Selectmen, as well as members of the public, some additional overview of that initial master plan process that the town overtook starting in 2013. The master plan is under the purview under state law of the Planning Board. And at that time, the Planning Board solicited for public proposals from consulting firms to update our 2000 master plan. We constituted a 10-member public master plan steering committee to lead the process that was guided by town staff as well. And we had a series of interviews and focus groups to develop the master plan. We had 2 public workshops that were very well attended, over 60 attendees at both in November of 2013 and May of 2014. And I just want to share with the members of the board and the members of the public some of the guiding principles and some of the goals that came out of the master plan before I turn the presentation over to Mr. Cahill to talk more about that area plan. The guiding principles that the master plan set forth was to support the town center as a focal point for bringing the community together through social, economic, cultural, and civic activities. To recognize the unique character and history of different neighborhoods, but be open to new development and redevelopment opportunities to strengthen the community identity, specifically in the town center. To become a home for all ages, incomes, backgrounds, and by supporting a mix of housing types that range of affordability and choice in housing options, and to motivate residents to live active and healthy lifestyles through community design, access to resources, and opportunities to a cleaner environment. And therefore, as one of the major goals in the land use section was to support the town center as a destination. The future opportunities exist around the Beale School, and the Beale School's location and size make it a potential focal point and destination. The goals are to conduct a design study of the town center that can help focus ideas and develop a clear vision for the area. And that is really what we set forth in a planning process with both the Planning Board and the support of the Board of Selectmen. So with your permission, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Cahill to talk more about the town center study and visioning process that was specifically done for Beale.
Please do, Mr. Cahill.
Thank you. The Planning Department took its first steps towards implementing the town center goals of the master plan by first successfully applying for and receiving 2 Mass Downtown Initiative grants to conduct a parking study in early 2018 and a wayfinding and branding signage study in 2019, which I am happy to report those signs should be going in this April. Shortly thereafter, the Planning Department, in conjunction with the Town Manager's Office, also successfully applied for a mass development, what's called a pre-development grant, to engage placemaking and urban design consultants Horsley Witten Group and Union Studio Architecture and Community Design in order to help the community conduct a comprehensive visioning study of the town center and the old Beale School site. The visioning study had 2 complementary components. The first was to consider the town center as a whole and develop strategies to strengthen the district. Second component was a public process to solicit feedback on the future of the old Beale School site. The public engagement process had several major community outreach elements. The first element included an opening discussion and a joint public meeting with the Beale School Reuse Committee, the Planning Board, and the Historic District Commission on October 4th, 2018. An electronic opening survey was advertised to the public later that same month with questions focused on the town center in general and the Beale School property specifically. Approximately 340 Shrewsbury residents responded to the survey. A public forum was subsequently held in December 2018 for all Shrewsbury residents to attend, where the results of the first survey were presented and conceptual diagrams were provided showing different hypothetical development ideas for the Beale School site. Attendees of the public forum were invited to vote on these concepts and to provide commentary and feedback. Immediately following the public forum, a second survey was made available to all residents that included the same conceptual plans as the ones shown at the public forum. Concluding the public engagement process, the consultant attended a public meeting of the Beale School Reuse Committee that included representatives from the Planning Department, Mass Development, and members of the public to discuss the results of the said community engagement process. The final visioning report, produced by Horsley Witten, identified zoning reform as central and essential to guiding future development in the town center. The recommendations in the visioning report emphasize creating a sense of local identity and an economy that provides a quote-unquote experience rather than just a collection of businesses as a strategy to draw sustained investment in commerce in Shrewsbury's town center. Taking the recommendations of the final visioning report, the Planning Department moved forward in the fall of 2019 with drafting an outline of the zoning bylaws for a new town center district. The zoning in the town center district was proposed to require that developers adhere to a strict set of design requirements based on a deep understanding of what makes New England town centers unique and endearing to residents and visitors. That means traditional architectural forms and designs, an engaging and comfortable environment at the street level where buildings and sidewalks meet, and a traditional mix of commercial and residential uses. After developing the initial zoning outline for the first draft of the new town center zoning district, the Planning Department organized and widely advertised 2 public forums at the Public Library in November and December 2019, with public turnout in the 50s for each event. So pretty good turnout. The draft zoning bylaws were subsequently amended to reflect the feedback from the forums, and the zoning warrant articles were made available on the Planning Board and Planning Department web pages, which only got discontinued when the pandemic started, obviously. The Planning Board's first 2 public hearings to discuss the proposed town center zoning district were held at their April 2nd and May 7th, 2020 meetings. Now, while the Planning Board did have to move because of COVID to an online format, because town meeting that year was delayed by 3 months to August, we actually ended up having 3 additional public hearings, which is, we usually only have about 2, to offer extra time for public feedback. Public hearings were also held with the Finance Committee on July 23rd, 2020, and with the Board of Selectmen on July 28th, 2020. The zoning articles received unanimous favorable recommendations to town meeting from the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and Planning Board. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay.
So, yeah, just, you know, so as we move from the town center study, then we start to move into the more definitive actions to set the framework in place and move towards the site plan development. And, you know, so we're moving in 2 parallel paths as we move into the summer of 2020 at the town meeting. And I think, Mr. Samuel, you had comments with regards to that meeting.
Sure. So in particular, I want to talk about one specific article, Article 23. But all the discussions, the meetings, the forums, the surveys, and the planning was being brought forward really to action. And that was to be done through Article 23 that was presented to town meeting members at the town meeting held at Oak Middle School on August 8th. Article 23 said the following. It was authorization to sell property at 1-7 Maple Avenue. It was a motion to transfer the town-owned property located at 17 Maple Avenue, originally acquired for school purposes, to the Board of Selectmen for the purpose of making the property available for sale for no less than $1, and to authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into any agreements and to do all things necessary to dispose of said property by sale upon such terms and conditions as the Board of Selectmen deem to be in the best interest of the town. Now, also in the town meeting, the book itself, there's always a description of what town meeting members are being asked to approve. In the following description, this warrant article was included in the town meeting book. The purpose of this article is for town meeting to authorize the Board of Selectmen to sell the property at 1-7 Maple Avenue, the current Beale Early Childhood Center, once the new Beale Elementary School is opened at 214 Lake Street. The Beale Reuse Committee was established in 2017 to undertake a comprehensive analysis of potential reuses for the Beale Early Childhood Center property. The analysis was to include future public uses as well as the potential benefits of disposing of the property located at 1 Maple Avenue. The Beal Reuse Committee presented their recommendations to the Board of Selectmen on July 9th, 2019. In conjunction with the Beal Reuse Committee's work, the town received a grant from Mass Development to study and prepare a town center visioning report that focused on the Beal School property. The report was issued in May 2019. In October 2019, the town was awarded another grant from Mass Development to create a request for proposal for the disposition of Beal School property. In January 2020, the town began the process for developing the RFP for the property located at 1 Maple Avenue, the Beal School building. The Beal Reuse Committee was recharged on January 28, 2020 as the Beal RFP Committee. The Beal RFP Committee is in the final stages of reviewing the Beal RFP for it to be issued if town meeting approves this article. The school committee voted to declare the subject property as being no longer necessary for school purposes on June 17, 2020. The RFP takes into consideration all of the feedback and study that has occurred since 2017. So that was presented to town meeting on August 8th. The Finance Committee held a hearing on this warrant article and then unanimously recommended 8-0. The town meeting approved this Article 23. And then at town meeting, there were 155 town meeting members present, and they approved this warrant article by well more than the 2/3 majority required. So that got the ball rolling, at least with respect to the next steps of being able to move forward with the process as part of all this visioning and planning that had been done.
So at this point, I think it would be important to talk a little bit more about the Beal RFP that was put into place. Ms. Lass, would you please talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mizikar, Mr. Chairman. Let me just make sure we're right on the right. I think we have one more slide, Taylor.
Yep, one more.
One more ahead.
One more.
And one more after that.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. So as might have been reiterated earlier in the process, the Board of Selectmen voted to establish the Beal Reuse Committee in early of 2018 when we knew that the Beal School was going to be located at 214 Lake Street. And the Beal Reuse Committee held their first meeting in February of 2018. They held a total of 19 meetings, and one of their very first meetings was on March 26, 2018, where they held a public hearing to hear the public's thoughts on the reuse of 1 through 7 Maple Avenue. They received pieces of correspondence and attendees in public to give testimony of what they might like to see for that property. As also alluded to, the Beal Reuse Committee members also participated in the town center parking study that Mr. Cahill discussed in June of 2018, with that report being issued in December of 2018. And the Beal Reuse Committee members participated in the town center visioning report process that was finally issued in May of 2019. In 2019, in October, again, the town was awarded a grant from Mass Development to create that request for proposal for the disposition of the Beal School. And in January of 2020, the town began that process for developing the RFP with the Beal Reuse Committee, the town staff, and the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen and the Beal Reuse Committee met to discuss the kickoff of that RFP process on January 13th, 2020 with the consultant Horsley Witten Group. And then subsequently, the consultant met with the Town Center Association and other stakeholders in the town to discuss the development of the RFP. The RFP was specifically written based upon the Town Center Visioning Study, which Mr. Mizikar alluded to as best practices for planning. And there was continued recommendations built into that based upon the studies and the work that the Beal Reuse Committee was doing at the time. And Mr. Cahill alluded to the forums that were also done related to the town center zoning, but that information was also incorporated into the RFP process. And on January 28th of 2020, the Board of Selectmen transferred the charge of the Beal Reuse Committee to the Beal RFP Committee, as Mr. Samia alluded to. The requests for proposals were finally issued on September 15th of 2020 after the favorable town meeting vote of August 8th, 2020. And the proposals were received by the town of Shrewsbury on January 7th of 2020 and reviewed by the Beal RFP Committee, and ultimately a recommendation for Civico Greenlee was given to the Board of Selectmen on March 24th that the Board of Selectmen subsequently discussed at a future meeting. So with that information, I'll turn it back to you, Chairman Samia, for further consideration.
Sure.
Yeah, keep going. Keep going forward. There you go.
There we go. So in terms of next steps, on March 30th, 2021, as a correspondence item, we had identified a memo from the Beal RFP committee dated March 24th for Morris DiPaolo, the Beal Reuse Committee, excuse me, at that point, recommendations for the reuse of Beal property. On May 11th, 2021, we had a joint meeting between the Board of Selectmen and the Beal Reuse Committee with its presentation from Civico. That presentation from Civico, which was available online as well as presented to us, it was covered as well on SMC, and they talked about the Beal Commons proposed program, 50 to 65 residential apartment units. There was a range of commercial space, ample residential and commercial parking, community open space. That was covered in a community advocate article on May 19th, and we sent out this together with a presentation from Civico and Greenlee on May 28th in Selectmen Selections. On June 8th, 2021, we also had a board agenda item number 8 to review the Beal reuse process to date, and then Mr. Mizikar gave a presentation about the planning process and the proposal. On June 29th, we held a Selectmen's Roundtable also to discuss the Beal proposal. And then subsequently, during that time from June 8th until December 7th, we held several executive sessions. Just to clarify, while this process has been open and transparent, and we are as public officials governed by the open meeting law, there are limited exceptions to the open meeting law. One in particular relates to the value of real property, which allows the board to leave open session into executive session because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the board. I talked about this earlier in January. It'd be akin to if you're trying to sell a business or a house or a car, then you have your significant other and a broker, and you're willing to you have strategic conversations, and imagine if you had to have those conversations right in front of the other party, you wouldn't be very successful in your negotiations. So that is what the exception to the open meeting law does allow. At the end, though, minutes of executive session will be are taken, and they will be released to the public for its review and no longer to be kept as a private record. So in total, we have held 9 executive sessions from May 25th, 2021 until January 25th, 2022. On September 28, 2021, we had a Beal reuse update and given an announcement and reports. We had a workshop to prepare for the public hearing, and then on December 7th, we held a public hearing. At the December 7th public hearing, as I mentioned earlier, we had heard 3 general themes to the proposal that was presented. They were as follows: wanted fewer residential units, more open space, and more parking. So
Taylor to advance the slide.
Sure. So at December 7th, just what I said, reduce the unit count, increase open space, and then public parking availability. And then on January 25th, 2022, the Board of Selectmen directed the town manager to continue negotiations to work with Civico within those parameters based on the feedback that we received on December 7th. At this time, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Mizikar.
If you could just go ahead one slide, thank you. So, board members, we've worked diligently as staff in continued negotiations, and we've enjoined town council at those meetings to review a land disposition agreement. Based upon the board's charge in those 3 primary drivers from our December 7th meeting, and I will get into the full details of the options in 1 minute. But we're able to reduce the unit count of apartments by at least 10. We're able to increase the open space by at least an additional 3/10 of an acre. It was previously 4/10 of an acre, so we'd be able to take it up to almost 3/4 of an acre. It will be retained and owned by the town of Shrewsbury, so it will not be in the hands of the private entity, which was the previous proposal. We've been able to maintain at least 20 open public parking spaces in addition to the parking spaces that would be associated with the building and development itself. Maintain all on-street parking along Haskell, which would be open to general public use, just like any other on-street parking is. Obviously, reducing the total amount of land that would be retained by the buyer, since the town will maintain 7/10 of an acre. We're able to maintain the sales price at one of the unit options, which is a 55-unit option, And of course, maintain the architectural integrity of the project. Building materials, design will follow the guidelines as established through the zoning bylaw for the town center district. If you could go ahead. So I want to walk through some of the more detailed concerns that we've heard and respond to resident comments as I see them, and then I'll make my recommendation to the board. So public processes are foreign to a lot of people, and we always do our best to try to be as transparent and explain how we conduct business on your behalf on a day-by-day basis. It's not something that we take for granted. We serve the public, we serve the Board of Selectmen, and the public outcomes are always of our main interest. So we've heard a lot of concern about there only being one bidder. In any given situation, in any public bidding process, it's always desirable to have more than one bidder. That's not the legal requirement of a public bidding process. So I want to talk about the legal requirements and then the responsiveness or the technical requirements of a public bidding process. This goes through Chapter 30B of the Massachusetts General Laws, through a specific set of guidelines when you do a request for proposals. So the legal requirements compel us to be competitive, fair, and transparent through a competitive and fair, transparent process. And responsiveness of the proposals simply means, did the proposal reasonably meet the vision which was laid out by the town in the RFP document itself? So with regard to legal requirements, competitive, fair, and transparent process that meet or exceed the statutory requirements. These were reviewed by our own town council prior to the issuance of the RFP, and we have confirmed that all standards have been met. In fact, the RFP process was open from September 15th, 2020 through January 17th, 2021, giving responders ample opportunity to pull down the RFP, review it, and make a bid decision. Ultimately, we can't compel anyone to bid on the process. We do know that 71 different individuals or entities downloaded the request for proposals. So there was nine town staff members or consultants / residents identified themselves, so let's exclude them. A couple people pulled it down 2 times, I'll exclude 2 more. So there were 60 different downloads of the request for proposals that included various individuals and companies. They included architects, national construction companies like Pulte Homes, regional developers like Wind Development, Grossman Development, who you all may be familiar with, that developed Lakeway Commons, local development companies, including realtors, contractors, and tradespeople. So the RFP saturated the marketplace, and ultimately one company responded. So then it turns to the adequate review of that RFP to determine if it met the vision that was set forth in the RFP document. So that all culminated in the RFP document itself, but was developed really over that 4 or 5 year period in advance of that as we went through the master plan and area plan project. So did the proposal or proposals meet the vision and technical requirements established by the town through the RFP? The Beal Reuse Committee took diligence from January 7th through March 30th in communicating to the Board of Selectmen, held public meetings, open debate on the topic, and found that it did. The Board of Selectmen has spent the last 10 months clarifying the viabilities of project technical requirements and the public's desires. It's clear that the proposal is consistent with the vision started in the 2016 master plan, refined in the town center zoning, and requested through the RFP. So let me address the sales price. So I will get into the specific proposals that will be before the board based upon our most recent negotiations, but I respect that an individual's gut reaction in hearing a number like $250,000 on a 4-acre parcel with a public building on it may feel uncomfortable, may not seem right. Everyone knows what they pay for their home and the value of that. Let me be very clear. This is not a market rate transaction. This is a public redevelopment project with public interest in mind. It's not a market transaction. You'll recall, Mr. Samia mentioned earlier that when the town meeting heard the vision for this project, they agreed to allow the board to sell it for $1 because the board had public interest in mind. This is not, me selling a piece of property to a willing developer who's looking to, where I'm looking to make the most money and the buyer is looking to build whatever development they want. We're basically selling a piece of property to a private entity, telling them what to build and regulating them throughout the entire process and holding their money in abeyance throughout that whole process. And we would actually keep it if they didn't perform within the public interest in mind. So this is completely different than a private transaction. There has to be a means, or this means that the project must balance the public interest, and there has to be financial viability still there for a developer, right? This is a private entity, a private developer. Of course, they're going to want to, have some level of profit. That's what the private sector does, and they wouldn't otherwise be at the table if they weren't going to make some type of profit that they deem to be appropriate. That off.
If you could silence your cell phone, please.
Certainly a private market rate development would only consider the financial benefit of the buyer and the seller. The more specific and costly requirements of public interests, the less financially viable the project may be. Trade-offs are required, and they're certainly coming to bear with regards to that $250,000 that was previously discussed. So for this project, let me be very clear what we think the matters of public interest have been. They've been discussed several times throughout this evening. The matters of public interest certainly reduce the long-term return. It's going to compel a developer to invest in public infrastructure, increase the risk to the developer, and potentially all of the above. So those areas particularly include not selling the entire parcel of land. So it's not a 3.86 acre redevelopment project. It's a 3.16 acre redevelopment project. Compelling them to provide more parking than's required and allowing them to open their private property up for general public parking, which is not something that a normal private developer would do. And we're asking for a retail component. If you're building a space to lease and the residential data shows that 98% occupancy rate is the norm within the town of Shrewsbury, and the retail data shows that it's much lower than anything that you could ever compel from the residential side of the economy, the market rate transaction would ultimately dictate that you would never invest in the retail space. But to bring vibrancy to the town center, we want to couple the retail development with the residential development. But left to the private market by itself, this would be 100% residential development, and it would clearly exceed the unit counts if it was a multifamily development or single-family lots, which would be numerous on that 3.86 acre site. These factors all impact the sales price. So just one point of comparison that I want to talk about is a similar project within the town of Milford. It's called the Milford Southeast School. There's a lot of similarities to that project. There was one bidder on that project. That project actually, they built 38 acres on this 1.6 acre development. The town sold that to that developer for $115,000. So we're able to have a better vision. What is our vision for the town of Shrewsbury that has been developed through detailed public engagement, and actually have a larger return and a more vibrant feel to this project that I'll be recommending in a couple minutes. So open space, specifically I want to address the comments calling for this site to be 100% open space. Just reflecting back on the master plan and the project plan, residents have overwhelmingly requested economically vibrant redevelopment to occur in the town center. And this property has the opportunity To do that, spur future development, we really see this as a catalyst, first dollars in an economic revitalization of our town center, which will spread to other properties. Just a couple more comments on the residential questions or comments that we've received through email. This is a mixed-use project. Mixed use means it contains residential development and business or commercial development. That has been present throughout the master plan process. It was identified as the ideal for the town center. It's already present in the town center, and it bolsters every town center. If you go to the south or you go to the west, people are replicating town centers like this any place they get the opportunity to do it. You see shops on the bottom, apartments up above, and they're creating their own town centers in 2020 that we have the benefit to build from historic roots on. So the Shrewsbury Town Center study that Mr. Cahill pointed out, which was developed through best planning practices, including public engagement that Mr. Cahill highlighted, calls for economic vibrancy, quaint New England town center, a cultural hub, and specifically states with regards to residential use, in almost every successful New England town center, there is an active residential use complementary to the scale of the buildings and helps establish the character of the center. Not only does the residential component bring financial viability to the project, it's the most critical aspect of moving forward for the visions as the vision for the town center as defined by the residents. A couple quick notes on traffic. We have to remember we're not building from a site that's fallow. So of course, school hasn't been in session there during the 2021-2022 school year. There are 250 to 300 trips there each and every day that school is in session. That includes cars and buses. So 250 to 300 trips was the norm from this site for the decades that it was used as a public school. A traffic study will ultimately be prepared as part of the planning board process. Through the negotiations that we've worked with a developer on, we are preventing them or will prevent them from having a curb cut on Maple Avenue. We are going to further beyond this project increase walkability, bikeability, viability through the Shared Streets program that we've actively participated with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And of course, I just remind everyone that this is on the WRTA bus route number 15. With regards to school children in the residential units, we have a wonderful set of data for all of our multifamily apartment complexes in town. Remember, the developer has indicated in their plans at their public comments that these units will be 1 or 2 bedroom units, regardless of the number of units that they would produce in the end. So I just want to share some of that data with you from the last 5 years, from 2017 through 2021, using similar apartment communities. The apartments in Shrewsbury produce 0.06 to 0.16 school-age students per unit. So if we're looking at a 65-unit development, we're looking at 4 to 11 school students. If we're looking at a 55-unit development, we're looking at 4 through 9 students, and so forth. So I know many of you know that school costs are not incremental on a per pupil basis, right? It's when you have enough students to push you over and require an additional teacher at a particular grade level. You know, from a development like this is not going to tip the scales. And actually, we've seen a significant decline over the past few years, COVID impact, in our public school enrollment. So we've taken great strides through this project, the Beal project, to build an appropriate sized elementary school to make sure we alleviate that additional burden. We were buoyed further by the reduction in enrollment during COVID, and we have space. But you know, if we're talking 4 to 9 students, that's just not going to move the needle and cause, you know, any damage in the school system. And finally, the impact of a 90-day delay. We received a lot of the similar emails saying, just pause it for 90 days, just pause it for 90 days. So I think we've been really responsive to the 85 emails that we received over the last 91 days since the December 7th public hearing. So really the same time frame. The community has been engaged from the start of this development in the 2016 master plan. And look, I'm committed. I've said it from day one. I said it when I sat at that table in the interview. We can always do better. We always want to provide more ways to engage the public. We're doing that with the master plan. There's a survey over there on your way out the door. Please grab it, scan the QR code. Tell us about the services you receive. That's why we're here. We're here to serve you. We will always do better. We'll always strive to do better. We've led this project using best practices over the last 7 years. If we were to delay this, we would be discarding 6 or 7 years worth of work. And that's what a true public process like this takes. I'm sorry that folks, only felt tangible ways to get involved in the last few weeks, but really we've been working on this for four years. I'm really concerned that if we're able to, feel the impact of 85 emails over the last 91 days, which I think we've addressed a lot of these in my upcoming recommendation, that we're just going to derail a long planning process and what would happen to the next endeavor. So if you could go forward one slide. So these are the two options that I've been able to negotiate since the January 25th directive. So option one is a 50-unit option, 12.5% affordability, which would require 7 units of affordable available, 7,000 to 8,000 square foot of commercial space, 7/10 of an acre, owned by the town, preservation of the World War I memorial, 128 parking spaces, including 20 public, $1,000 sales price, and a total estimated annual tax revenue directly derived from this project of $154,192 in year one. Very conservative in those estimates. If I was to insert the actual value on a door-by-door basis of a project like Lakeway Commons, easily can raise that number, but I never want to disappoint the board or residents whenever we make these revenue estimates. It's a very conservative number at $155,000. Option two is a 55-unit option. We're going to maintain the same amount of affordability, commercial space, open space owned by the town, preservation of the memorial, add additional parking spaces. It would be the $250,000 sales price with an estimated annual tax revenue of a little over $167,000. Again, very conservative. So, Taylor, can you move to the next slide? So to be very clear, my recommendation is option two. From December 7th, we had 65 units that were presented to this community. The community asked us to reduce the unit counts. We were able to reduce the unit counts. We maintained the sales price. We increased by 75% the amount of open space that will be available to all the residents. 7/10 of an acre is roughly the softball field that sits down there today. It is really, I think, the most viable project that we can set forth, considering everything that we've talked about tonight. This is a public-private partnership, public redevelopment initiative where we're selling a piece of land and telling them what to do with it. And I think this will bring great economic vibrancy to the town center. And this is my recommendations to the board based upon our most recent negotiations. Happy to hand it back over to you, Mr. Singh.
Sure. At this point, I think the first question in front of us is option one versus option two, plus given the town manager's recommendation of option two. Board members, what are your thoughts?
I have a question.
Sure, or questions. Mrs. Gassavan.
Thank you. In either option, do we always retain the open space, correct?
That's correct.
So that if the development were to sell, it's still ours, it's what we want on it. That's something that perhaps can be developed as a community.
Correct.
So the developer, plants grass seed? Like what do
Yeah.
we get at the end
Yeah.
of it?
So the developer would have access to the site during the construction period. We wouldn't want anyone in a public park adjacent. We would get a leveled, cleared, loomed and seeded site that would be open for the town to define the ultimate use. We have the benefit of the community preservation funding coming forward with open space and other dollars that will be available to help define that park and the public image and the neighborhood image, and we can make appropriate improvements once we understand what that is.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Board members?
I'd just like to make two comments at this point. Going back to the Milford project, which has been held up as an example of what we should try to emulate. The Milford project is 1.6 acres. There's no open space involved in it, and there's no retail in it. We don't find ourselves in a much different place than that project. It is a 55 and over, so it's age restricted. And I just want to add that we've been able, through our consultants and a little of our own digging, to look at 6 other schools that have been sold or they're in the process of trying to be attempted to be sold by other municipalities. The prices range from $2,000 as high in Beverly as $900,000. Everyone has its own unique characteristics, and that's what drives the price. At least 2 of these, and actually of the 6, one of them is not out for bid yet. One of them looks like it fell through because it stopped in 2019, and the developer who supposedly has the job doesn't show it anywhere on its site. There's no record of it. So we're down to like 4. 2 of those only had 1 bidder, and that's not unusual for a project like this. And I would just add the fire alarm building in Worcester on Park Ave, which the city of Worcester wanted rehabbed, sold for either $100 or $1 because the city had a vested interest in wanting to preserve that building. So these types of prices are not unusual. The other thing that's interesting is every one of these school projects, every single one of them, except for ours, were apartments. They were all apartments. So again, this is what happens with these buildings. This is what happens with these sites. And the only other thing I just wanted to add is Quinn 35, which has 250 apartments in it, which is the newest apartment complex to come online, and there are others that have higher student counts than this, has between 19 and 22 students in it. So as Mr. Mbta said, the impact on the school system from apartments as compared actually to subdivisions, which we also track, is lower. So I just, at this point, just wanted to make those 2 points. More to say, but I'd like to hear what everybody else says.
Okay. And
Can I ask a question?
please do.
And I apologize if I missed where to address this, but Mr. Mbta, with these 2 options, I know I have had some questions about are these Class A apartments? Do both of these options maintain that Class A status? And can you just tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so Class A apartment would be managed on-site. You know, so it'd be a leasing office, on-site present, on-site maintenance, those types of facilities on-site. So yes, both of these options will have, you know, a property manager on-site that will be there to, you know, provide whatever is needed for leasing and other needs of the property. Both of these options do maintain this, and it was part of those conversations that we had with the developer. I think that's really important, right, to have on-site management, and there's a critical mass that's associated with that, right? So someone has to carry that cost, so to speak, in the business world of that individual and their time at that site. So yes, but both of these are Class A managed on-site options.
Any other questions? I have a couple questions. World War I memorial, excuse me. So I know you talked about a 3.86 acre parcel will retain 0.7 acres. In addition to that, the World War I memorial would also remain accessible to the public, correct? So that's additional open space?
Right, so yes, it is addition, it's not included in the 7/10 of an acre, and the town would have perpetual rights to the monument. Yeah.
And then just briefly, what are the protections that make sure that it will be the memorial on a perpetual basis? What kind of protections do we have to make sure that's the case?
So, I mean, it'll be handled by town council formally, but, you know, there'll be a perpetual easement over that aspect of it. You know, we've even had the detailed conversations and negotiations that if this project moved forward and there's construction during a Veterans Day in any given year, that site will be reopened back up. Fences will be pushed back. We'll be able to hold the ceremony that we want to have there, but it will be at least a perpetual easement, and you know, there'll be appropriate liability, you know, to the surrounding property and things like that.
Thank you. And then one other question on parking. We hear a lot about parking and the need for additional parking and the challenge of parking at the town center. The two questions. The public spaces that are here, well, it's in tandem. So is there any difference in terms of the sufficiency of the spaces for retail and the residents between the two options with having 5 additional units?
Well, no, I mean, so the number of units are adequately compensated for. You'll remember that the town center zoning district doesn't have specific traditional parking requirements. It's more flexible, but these meet the zoning standards required for the appropriate spaces. So, and, you know, we would work with the developer with the shared parking program that the Planning and Economic Development Department's putting in place to further maximize that. And this is, as I also said, an opportunity to find more non-motor vehicle ways to get people to the town center. Walking, biking, shared use paths, things like that is on our bigger picture initiatives.
And then is it fair to say with the 20 on-site public parking spots that it's an incremental help towards the parking challenges, right?
Yeah.
That's the design of that.
Yep, and it would be, you know, every conversation with every developer that we have going forward. The wayfinding signage will help direct people to those spaces that do exist. And we'll explore those opportunities, every opportunity that we get.
Mr. DiPaolo, thank you.
A question. The way I understand the LDA, just to be clear, whatever the parking number turns out to be, because things could change a little bit here and there in the size. I don't think it's going to get any bigger on the retail, but the type of retail could change the parking mix, whatever. Whatever the developer is required for the developer's project is one number, and whatever that is, the 20 spaces are on top. It isn't like taking 136, 20 spaces, and if they need 138, it goes down to 18. The way the LDA is written, my understanding, it's 20 public spaces above whatever they require. And the other thing is, then whatever the final number is on the street, which we think is going to be 9, but final design will determine that because it's basically the area where the bus is queued up. Those are publicly available spaces. Those can't be counted in the developer's count. So what we're really talking about for publicly accessible spaces is 29, or it could be 28. I think that's important to note. And Wesleyan, whatever's parking there is also going to stay. It's my understanding. Whatever's there. That cutout at the bottom, is that correct?
That's correct.
So questions, or what are the thoughts between option 1 and option 2 being recommended by the town manager? Mr. LeBeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've spent some time thinking about option 1, or effectively what is option 1, what is option 2. I mean, I think what we see here is it's sort of an algebra equation. The higher number of units, the higher purchase price, the higher annual revenue, or lesser units, smaller purchase price. So, and also smaller annual revenue. So as I think about this, if I have to evaluate the two, I think with option 2, I mean, obviously, we gain a higher purchase price. We also heard from the manager that the estimated number of students that this project would generate based on 5 years of very detailed analysis of what we have in multifamily housing presently would be 4 through 9 students. So I don't find that objectionable. And though I recognize that the difference suggested in the annual revenue is small, I also heard the manager say they were very conservative estimates. And the annual revenue, to me, is one of the key components of this project. Certainly, I'd like to get a good purchase price, but the town is in this for a long haul. It wanted it to convert the property to tax producing as opposed to no tax produced as it has been since the Beale School was constructed. And it's time. I mean, year after year after year, the value of the property will increase, its tax assessment will increase. Starting with the higher base, over time that number will always be higher than the other one. So as I review the two options in front of me, after really thinking about it, I'm more comfortable with, I prefer, and I think option 2 is better than option 1. So I would be leaning towards option 2.
Thank you. Colleagues? What do you think? Option 1 or 2?
Do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
All right. So I have spent quite a lot of time thinking about the algebraic equation, as you put it, Mr. LeBeau. It's a trade-off, right? And trying to balance what I'm hearing from people and the two options. It's not an easy decision to make, and I wonder how many people who are joining us tonight, either in the room or watching from home, what they would do if they had to make the decision, right? In my time on this board, I've never turned away from having to make hard decisions, and that will continue this evening. I think that this project at 55 units and $250,000 is the direction that offers the best solution and the best option, I guess, for the town center redevelopment. And it's because of what I've heard at the public hearing, but also what I've heard from my interactions with residents since then. Fewer units, more open space, and the maximum amount of upfront money is important to people, and this is the option that stays true to that. And I hear folks loud and clear. I've spent hours over the past 91 days, I guess it is, talking to people on the phone, talking with people when I'm out running errands. I've met with people in their homes. I've responded to emails. I've had impromptu conversations in passing. It seems everybody wants to talk about Beale. And I think that that's great, right? Because that's what we're here for, is to talk to people and to hear what they have to say about different projects and different things that are going on in town. And I know these meetings aren't always the most interesting thing, and it's great to have a full room here tonight, and I'm glad that people are engaged. And I'm glad for every single conversation that I was able to have. But at the end of the day, it's my decision. It's our decision. I have to be able to justify not only to myself, but to the public, why I'm choosing to go in a certain direction. And I have heard repeatedly over the past month, 2 months, to listen to my constituents. And I want you to know that even if you disagree with my decision tonight, that I have listened. I've listened to both sides. I've listened to people who agree, to people who don't agree, to people who want something completely different. And it doesn't mean that I didn't hear you if my decision doesn't reflect what you wanted it to be. It's not a matter of listening to the loudest voice. It's a matter of balancing all the voices and coming up with a project that I think is the best for the community. So that's kind of where I am on it, why I think the 55-250, I don't know that it'll make the most people comfortable, but I think it's the best solution. Having been involved with the process from the beginning, as a resident, as a selectman, as a town meeting member, as co-chair of the campaign committee to build the new school at a different location, which inevitably led to conversations about what would happen to the old building. I've spent a great deal of time trying to make Shrewsbury a great community for all people to live in and for all to thrive in. And offering diversity of housing in our town center, offering an opportunity for commercial development, offering an opportunity for open space that all people can enjoy. I think this is the option that achieves those goals. And all these years of community engagement, community involvement, working together in order to come up with the best plan for the town center. I understand that there are people who maybe just found out about this project and they're feeling like they were left out or not heard. But again, you don't need a public hearing to reach out to someone on the Board of Selectmen. I hope that people in this room, if they've texted, if they've called, if they've sent an email, people at home that are watching, that you felt heard, that you got a call back, that you got an email back, that I responded to a text and said, when can you talk? That's public engagement. That's public feedback. That's democracy. And I would hope that everyone in this room felt that they had that opportunity to reach out. So I know that's a long way of coming up with an answer to which option I like, but it's hard to read social media and not be able to respond and just want people to understand like the thought process that you go through. And you know, that it is a decision that I feel impacts me because I'm a resident here, and I understand that it impacts people because you're all residents here. And you know, we just try to do the best that we can and find common ground together. So long answer to the 55-250.
Thank you. Mrs. Flynn.
So if I'm maybe one of our audience members tonight, they're maybe thinking, where's option 3, which is not to choose option 1 or 2. So I think that I want to maybe first acknowledge that this has not been it's not easy to make a decision that not everyone agrees with. And while I've spoken to a lot of people who are excited about the project, I know it's an outcome that a lot of people don't want. And I agree with Beth that that does not mean opinions have been disregarded. But I find, you know, in our role and in my job, my decision-making is grounded on balancing the wants and needs of a large community with a lot of different opinions and preferences in making a decision that I think benefits the town as a whole. This project, I think, meets the objectives of the town visioning study and the RFP process and provides the renewal and revitalization that some people want and includes the open space that others want. And I think it will improve our town center and attract business, and business that residents will appreciate while also maintaining recreational space for residents to enjoy. So I think it will be a draw for the entire community, and this is why I support it. I really struggled with the 50 to 55. I really am sensitive to the feedback about fewer units, but I also have received so much outrage about the purchase price. And I agree with my colleagues that I think option 2 is the better of the 2 options, and I think that it would be great to engage in how we might invest that money into whether it's that recreational space or other town center development. So I think that I agree. We need to improve how we disseminate information. And I am equally committed to exploring better ways for us to communicate and engage. And I do think it's a shared responsibility. And I do hope that this is a catalyst for people who want to be in a position to influence decisions, to get more involved. And that can be in so many different ways, whether it's in a role as a selectman or other elected official, a town meeting member, but other committees. We have a great town center committee that is really committed to making our town center a great thing for everyone. So I hope we can find opportunities for people to get involved.
Thank you. Mr. DiPaolo.
Well, I think first I want to say we're all residents of the town. And we're all trying to give the best opinion, everybody, people in this room, other people that I've talked to on the street, either for or against, about what they think is in the best interest of the town. And I think almost everybody has been sincere in their beliefs. So I think we're at a point where we have to make a decision, and some people are going to agree with the decision, some people aren't, but that doesn't mean that we don't care. Like other people in this room, several other people in this room, I grew up here. I remember the town center when it was a much different place. The Hale Block was here forever. Worcester 5-cent savings bank was in the corner where the Donut Inn was. Hale drugstore was on the other end. And the parking lot in between was dirt for the longest time. And my dentist was in this little tiny building where the driveway is for Songbird Dental. I mean, things have changed. That doesn't mean they're worse, they just mean they changed. I think we've become a more vibrant community, and I'm open to change as long as I think that it's positive change. I will say that from 2016, when we started this whole process of 2013, the direction that all of the public forums, all of the work that was done prior to the reuse committee was leading to vibrancy in the town center. It was a constant theme. We want more. We want it to be more walkable. And as it got closer to the process, or where we got to when the Beale School was actually available for surplus, or going to be available for surplus, it seemed like the consensus led to some more retail and residential, whether people want to accept that or not. It's in the studies. We can argue about how much, but that's where it led. And being on the reuse committee from 2018 and following even before that, and putting a lot of time into it, like other people on our committee did and staff did, we worked really hard to get to the point where that RFP came up. We struggled at times of what we thought we should ask for in terms of development there, not development there. And in the end, I think one of the things we decided was, here's what we don't want. And you'll see that in the RFP. We don't want a gas station. We don't want a car lot. We don't want a single-use building like a chain store that you drive in, pick up your stuff, and you leave. That does nothing for the center. We decided that, based on conversations with our consultants who've done this in other parts of the region, other parts of the country, I personally talked to a few architects who do urban development, redevelopment. What they said was two things. The market is going to decide what is gonna go on that property if you want it developed. Not what we want, well, we can say we're gonna leave it the way it is until we get whatever it is we want, but if we wanted to do something with it, the market is ultimately gonna decide, like it does on everything else. And the other thing that they said was, if you are trying to do what people are asking for in the town center, to have more activity on the common, to have more vibrancy, more activity on the sidewalk, then you need to have some kind of mixed use. It's like urban planning 101. And as it turned out, that's where this came. I could have lived with something else. I think it needed to be developed. I think it needed to get on the tax rolls. I could have lived on something else if it seemed like it was the best thing for the town center. But this is what we got, and I do think it's appropriate. So I think we followed the spirit of the master plan, the town center study, et cetera, with this proposal. And spent a lot of time, although people might not think so, there was a lot of debate on and off with the reuse, the RFP committee, whatever we want to call ourselves, at the time. Is this the right thing? Isn't it the right thing? Should we be doing this? Should we be doing that? I can tell you, and my colleagues will tell you that I was up and down on whether or not I wanted to move ahead on this or not at different stages, because it wasn't clear to me that the vision that we wanted was going to be brought forward. And in the end, this proponent, they got it right from the beginning, whether or not it was exactly right. They got it. Open space, public parking, mixed use. They got it. It needed to be fleshed out. And I think that they've done a good job to this point of meeting the expectations of the RFP. Having said all that, and I could go out longer of all of what was behind this, but I just want to say one other thing. This idea of only one bidder, that's true. Can't find my paper, but out of all these companies that pulled RFPs, which they do, and we heard that people in the industry didn't know about it. Some people didn't, but a lot of them did. And when you distill this down to the actual types of entities that would be interested in making a proposal on this site, out of the 60 or whatever, there were about 15. Almost every one of those were exclusively housing developers. And after the RFP came back, and we said, ooh, what happened? Did we screw up? You know, why didn't people come back? And our consultants went out and called a lot of these people, these developers in there. It's a public list. They're big companies, they're regional, they're local. What the feedback was on a lot of these companies was, we're apartment builders. We don't want anything to do with mixed use, and we don't want to get into one of these urban development projects. So that's part of the reason why we didn't hear from other entities. Because if we opened this up to apartments, you would have had 50 companies coming up. And that is not what we wanted. We did not want the 3 or 4 acres to be apartments. Because truth be told, if you wanted to maximize that site, you could get a lot more than 65 apartments on it. We might not like the way they look, but the capacity of the site, it could happen. And as a matter of fact, one developer who decided not to submit because of other business decisions actually was going to propose more than what we had. So just to give you some context. Having said all that, I really think, and I told my colleagues and I've told everybody else from the start, if I did not believe that this was the right thing to do for the center of town, if I had any hesitancy at all, I would not vote to move ahead. I absolutely would not. if it wasn't the right project, it wasn't the right project. We could all disagree about that. Based on all the work I did, information that we were given, and the way the process developed, I think we have a good project for the town. And you know what? History's going to judge whether or not we make the right decision. I happen to think when you look around at other towns that are, and cities that are doing this kind of rejuvenation or whatever, I think it's the right thing. I think this is the right project. I think the difference between 55 units and 50 units in terms of its effect on the site in the center, I think the difference is minimal. I do agree with Mr. LeBeau, and I agree with everything that everybody else said. I think the 55 units makes the most sense. When we get to the point of asking for a vote, that would be what I would vote for.
Okay, so we have four. I'm not going to repeat a lot of the points that were made. I'll have more comments after this step before any vote on an LDA. But I think it's really simple to say, looking at the levers that were brought forth during the 12-7 hearing, it was trying to do the best we can, increasing open space, public parking, decreasing the number of apartments, and balancing, as been said as well, the cash purchase price. So I do think option 2 is the best. I think that the $250,000 could also be utilized to put together another ball field. That's another possibility for the fund, or cover any ancillary expenses. So I'm not going to repeat all the points that were made with respect to option 1 or 2. I'll talk a little more about the decision process that I did when we are going to vote on an LDA, so I'm fine with option 2. So we have consensus on option 2. So, Mr. Mizikar, the next step would be?
For the board to officially vote to sign a land disposition agreement with Civico Greenlee Development, provided the terms that you viewed in option 2.
Okay. Sorry. Sensitive.
So moved.
Hold on, I have some comments. I do want to. Any comments on the LDA before? I won't go first. Mr. LeBeau.
Well, Mr. Chairman, yeah, I took your previous question to be very narrow and what we preferred. I do have a few general comments that I will try to keep quite brief. So when I started to think about the various communications that the board was receiving and how I was going to process them and how I was going to determine what my vote was going to be, I admit I derived a bit of comfort from our government system. Actually, the system of checks and balances that we have in American government. So we heard that this process began very generally in the master planning process back in 2013, became more focused to the Beale property, I believe in 2016 or 2017. And there was a lot of activity. We heard about a lot of activity, about a lot of opportunity for public comment, not just opportunity. We heard about a lot of participation. Mr. Cahill mentioned several sessions with 50 plus. I think he mentioned some others that were more. So I think it's been demonstrated that this, I mean, I often joke about how slowly government moves. I kid about the speed of government. Talk about a methodical planning process, a multi-year process where there were multiple opportunities for people to get involved. But I note that every bit of that process, till we got to the town meeting, was driven by the executive branch. Whether the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, the manager who works for the board, and the people who work in this building. So then, we have to walk into town meeting. Town meeting in Shrewsbury, as I hope everyone knows, we have an elected town meeting since 1954. We have 240 elected town meeting representatives who act as the legislature of this community. The selectmen present warrant articles to the town meeting for its consideration. We propose, they dispose, they handle, they decide. As part of the process for these particular articles, well, first of all, the Finance Committee needs to, by law, is required to make a recommendation on every article presented at town meeting. I want to make sure everyone is aware that the Finance Committee is not appointed by anyone sitting in this room. The Finance Committee is a component of the legislative branch. It is essentially the Ways and Means Committee of town meeting. It is appointed by the elected town moderator who runs town meeting. There were 5 articles at town meeting. One, to give the board the authority to dispose of the property. 4, relative to zoning. The Finance Committee unanimously recommended every one of those articles. The Planning Board, an executive branch board, is required by law to consider zoning articles. There were 4 zoning articles considered. And I should mention both the Finance Committee and the Planning Board hold public hearings. The Planning Board voted by unanimous vote to recommend the 4 articles. So then we went to town meeting. Normally, almost every vote at town meeting requires a majority vote. One more, you know what I mean, majority vote. Every one of these articles required a 2/3 vote, because built into our system is a process by which some of these major decisions, such as disposing of town property, such as rezoning, when the original town charter was developed, required that a 2/3 supermajority was required to pass these articles. So we walk into town meeting never knowing how town meeting is going to handle our articles. But we know we're walking into a quorum at town meeting is 120. We actually reduced quorum in 2020 because of COVID, because we were afraid not enough people would show up. We had the normal quorum plus. So it was a very reasonable attendance at town meeting. The article to allow the board to dispose of this property for a price no less than $1 was approved by the town meeting by 2/3 vote. There were 4 zoning articles proposed. 3 of the 4 passed by unanimous vote. 1 of the 4 passed by 2/3 majority. So I take great comfort in the fact that the Board of Selectmen went before the legislative body of the town of Shrewsbury, seeking its approval and permission and authority to move forward. And that was granted, as I mentioned, by supermajorities or by unanimous votes. So that really helps me as I move forward. And I do want to note, and I am slowly coming to conclusion, I do want to note that Article 33, which was to create a new zoning district called the Town Center District, and the language in the town warrant, the very first thing it says in this new language, it's going to be item U in the place in the zoning bylaw, Town Center District. 1, the purpose of the Town Center District is to foster the development of a traditional New England village center that features a vibrant mix of civic, commercial, institutional, residential, and open space uses within close proximity to each other to create attractive, walkable neighborhoods where people can live, shop, eat, conduct business, and enjoy arts and cultural activities. Other components would be to increase the town's tax base and to allow for a mix of land uses. So I think the town has been fair and transparent throughout. I think the RFP process has been fair, transparent, and competitive. I think that if there are those who, in hindsight, realize they missed a business opportunity, they had a chance. Lastly, I just want to say I think we all know Shrewsbury Center, whether we've lived here for a long time or a short time. And I think I hope we could all agree that despite, or not despite, acknowledging that there are some successful businesses in the center, thankfully. But what we have endured and what we have seen for, I don't know, a generation or close to, we've seen businesses come and go all the time. And usually, there are empty storefronts separating the new businesses. I believe that this project will lead to a transformation of the town center to make it the more viable community, the more viable center that was envisioned through this multi-year planning process that involved hundreds of members of our community. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the moment.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, I have a few. We talked earlier about Article 23. So the standard of review for this project is set forth under Article 23, what the Board of Selectmen deemed to be in the best interest of the town. So part of that is what is that standard. So when analyzing whether the proposed Beale Commons project is in the best interest of the town, I, like each member of the board, have undertaken a rigorous review of the prospective project, done my due diligence, and asked hard questions every step of the way. To reach my conclusion, I have undertaken both a cost-benefit analysis and a gut-level analysis. With respect to the gut-level analysis, does the proposed project improve the town of Shrewsbury? A town I grew up in, a town I chose to move back to, a town I'm proud to call home. So in looking at the potential costs, I looked at the following. Will there be additional infrastructure, roads and utilities required? Redevelopment projects that do not require additional physical infrastructure like this one with additional roads or utilities, and which are of higher density, multi-unit versus single family, significantly lower this associated incremental costs. So we should not have a lot of costs with this. For this project, there are no new lane miles of public roads to maintain. Water and sewer infrastructure do not need to be extended or expanded. Will there be additional school children? We've talked a lot about that. We talked about Lakeway Commons and history there, a maximum of 23 school children, and for Madison Place, the range between 13 and 15 school children. So using that math and the history that we have, it's 11 school children would be expected from this new development, and absent a cohort where everyone's the same age, the cost impact would be nominal. Will there be additional traffic? Traffic studies will be done at the planning board level. I think there's additional work with Mass DOT given the location of the property. But Mr. Mizikar gave the fact earlier. It's been a school. We're not starting at 0 trips per day. On average, there were between 250 and 300 trips a day, of which these trips included 70 staff cars, 70 vehicles every day with staff. What are the costs of losing open space? The revised proposal includes 0.7 acres of open space, which the town will own, and the community will have unencumbered access to and input on going forward. It was alluded to earlier about the Community Preservation Act, and that'd be an opportunity to invest in the space. This 0.7 acres, which covers most of the softball field, is approximately 0.1 acre less than the current ball field and will preserve the Veterans Memorial in perpetuity through the deed, and it will be for generations to continue to enjoy. We did hear from the residents on December 7th, particularly the neighbors, that open space was important to them. And that is why from December 7th on, particularly, January 25th, from the December 7th hearing, an additional 0.3 acres were negotiated as part of this transaction. Well, I don't take the loss of open space for granted, particularly the playground that was at Beale. I don't take it lightly. I also considered the other open space that's close, the Patton Playground, the municipal fields across from the Light Department was approximately 14 acres, the Foundation Fields, 20 acres, Dean Park, 79 acres, and the town common and in front of town hall, an acre each. So then I looked at what are the benefits. The benefits have been talked about quite a bit. Provides additional tax revenues for the town in option 1 and option 2. The conservative estimates have been brought forward. It turns public non-taxable land into private taxable land. And the project is expected to spur economic development and revitalization of the whole town center, which should activate it, which we believe will ultimately lead to additional tax revenues. We all know that additional revenues will enable services that will benefit all residents. It provides a destination for residents. We know that there's a demand for it. We saw at the Yuletide event, the first two, I believe, was 2,300 and then 3,000 participants in both. There is a real demand for this. As stated in the town's master plan, many New England communities have a town center that is the focal point of civic life, and this is certainly the case in Shrewsbury. The town center has the look and feel of a traditional village. It is seen as an area that should be strengthened, so it becomes more of a destination. We also believe this will provide a built-in customer base for local businesses. In almost every successful town center, there is an active residential use complementary to the scale of buildings that help establish the character of the center. Based on historical experience, we expect in this case we're looking at 55 apartments to have a nominal impact on our schools or municipal services, as I talked about, and many residential units similar to what's being proposed have been tax positive. The other important area is it's providing additional affordable housing units in town. Providing affordable housing is one of the goals adopted by the Board of Selectmen on September 14th, 2021. So, and the other thing I just want to say as a side note, looking at this developer, we've also gone physically to a bunch of the locations that were presented to us as well in May. We've gone to Reading and Lincoln and Sherborne, all aesthetically pleasing, well-developed, very vibrant. And together with the quality of the proposed developer and town zoning bylaw amendments approved on August 8th, 2020 with the New England-style village, we can take comfort that this will be a project of high quality. So from an economic standpoint and gut check, my conclusion is the same. I believe that this will make a significant and positive impact on the town center and the town of Shrewsbury. The proposed project meets objectives that are based on community input and preference. It's a substantial investment made on our behalf, north of $20 million, and we will get the benefits of improved aesthetics, retail of the type that many in town want, additional parking, we talked about the 20 spots, and the belief that this project will serve as the catalyst for future investment in the development of our town center. And honestly, I feel that it's a project that all residents will enjoy and be proud of for generations to come. So for all the foregoing reasons, I believe that this is a project that is in the best interest of the community. It meets the standard that town meeting set forth on August 8th, 2020, and I'm in favor of approving the project. Any other questions or comments? Not? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to make a motion. I just want to make sure it's in good form.
Sure.
So I'm asking
Sure.
for some suggestions of what would be included in a motion to
Sure.
adopt option 2 moving forward.
Sure. I would suggest that a motion would be for the Board of Selectmen to enter into and sign an agreement with Civico Greenlee Development based upon option 2 that's been presented this evening, which includes 55 units, a sales price of $250,000, and the other miscellaneous items. Said agreement has been provided to the board and is available for your execution this evening.
Mr. Chairman, rather than simply restating that, I will say so moved.
And I will say second.
I am going to do a roll call vote given the, this, so I will have been moved and seconded. I'll ask for a roll call vote. Mrs. Cassavant.
Aye.
Mrs. Flynn.
Aye.
Mr. LeBeau.
Aye.
Mr. DiPaolo.
Aye.
Mr. Samia. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is to review presentation of the MBTA Community Draft Guidelines by Bernard Cahill, Director of Planning and Economic Development. Mr. Cahill.
Mr. Chairman,
The room
may
clear?
I request a brief recess?
Sure.
while the
Let's take a 5-minute recess. Thank you. Welcome back. Before we go to the next item, colleagues, one thing I'd like to run across and just related to 7, just to maybe authorize basically that's what we just approved, to authorize the town manager to just put a statement together that is summarizing what we just said.
Right.
Is that acceptable?
This statement would then be available for the
Yeah.
public to view on our website.
Yeah, so it's merely a summary of what we had talked about. Summarizing the decision that we made, if that's all right with the board, and
Sure.
taking action to authorize the town manager to prepare a summary of the board's actions undertaken today.
Sure.
Can I have Mr. LeBeau, is that okay with you?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, if I could get a motion.
So moved.
Second.
I have it moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. So thank you. It's just merely a summary. There's nothing new. It's all what was part of this record. So we'll go on to new agenda item number 8 under new business. Review presentation of the MBTA Community Draft Guidelines by Bernard Cahill, Director of Planning and Economic Development. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Before I get going, I didn't realize, I'll apologize, I didn't realize when I scheduled this meeting that this would be the same night as the prior agenda item. So this is a little dense. I just want to re-emphasize to everyone at home and in this room today that this is a multi-year process. And right now what you're seeing are the draft guidelines. There is legislation, but the draft guidelines by the Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, are still being worked out. And again, multi-year. So if there's something tonight you don't get in this dense amount of zoning and land use, that's okay. It's not happening tomorrow. It's not happening next week. We're talking a months and years long process. So just everyone remind themselves that I'm happy to talk, and I will be back in the future to keep this process going. So tonight I'm here to talk about the MBTA communities legislation as it's come to be known. To also ask for your feedback tonight for DHCD public comment, and I'll get into that a little bit later. To provide you some background, summarize the draft guidelines, tie it all together with what are the anticipated impacts for Shrewsbury, the impacts of non-compliance, and then kind of future next steps and kind of important things afterwards that are coming up. So what is the MBTA communities legislation? So for those of you who are in the know, there was an economic development bill passed last January 2021, and this was part of that. It's a very dense economic development bill. You can look it up if you want to see the whole thing, but this was part of that. And later in the year, December of 2021, Department of Housing and Community Development, fondly known as DHCD, issued draft guidance to help clarify to communities how this legislation is going to work in practice. The MBTA communities legislation, as a broad overview, requires every MBTA community to have at least one zoning district of what they're calling reasonable size, in which multifamily housing, that's 3 or more housing units in one structure, is permitted by right and meets the following criteria: that this zoning district have a gross density of 15 units per acre, that it be located not more than half a mile from a commuter rail station, the other ones aren't applicable, have no age restrictions, and be suitable for families with children. So is Shrewsbury an MBTA community? The answer is yes. Yes, it is. By state statute, we are considered a commuter rail, and by this statute, commuter rail community. You can see it here. This is taken directly from the DHCD website. And as you can see here, Shrewsbury's borders are well within a half-mile radius of the Grafton commuter rail station, making Shrewsbury a commuter rail community. There are different designations. We're going to get into that in just a second. So what does as of right mean? As of right means that the planning board in the town cannot deny an application or development within this zoning district. So pretty much that means no special permits. Special permits are discretionary to the planning board and can lead to a no vote. And the site plan also cannot be so onerous that it would impose conditions that a development could not occur at all within this zoning district. We were informed last week by I mean everyone who attended an online webinar by DHCD that form codes and design requirements would be allowed Again, provided they're not discretionary. In other words, a board member couldn't say, well, I just don't like the look of those buildings, right? It would have to be, for every 100 feet of rooftop, you have to have X number of dormers. So it can't be discretionary, it has to be exact. So that was made pretty clear to us last week. All right, so what is reasonable size? As mentioned earlier, it has to have a minimum land area, this new zoning district, family zoning district, of at least 50 acres of land. Communities with some land area within that half a mile of the transit station, as I just showed you on that map, require that at least half of the land area of that new multifamily zoning district be within that half-mile radius, with exception in unusual cases. I'm going to revisit that later. There's a lot of things I'm going to revisit, so just be patient. Overlay districts are allowed. Overlay districts, for those at home who don't understand them or anyone in this room, go over the base districts. So if you have like a commercial business district or a residential district, that's your base district. And an overlay district can actually go over all of those districts, or some of them, or none of them, depending on what a town would like to do. The one caveat is that at least 25 of the acres within that overlay have to be contiguous, which means all together touching each other, right? You can't just have a little piece here and there, and nothing could be less than 5 contiguous acres together. So continuing on with reasonable size, there's also a minimum unit capacity within a multifamily district based on the category that a community falls under. And as I mentioned earlier, Shrewsbury does fall under a commuter rail community category, which means it has to allow, and I will get to the numbers, this new zoning district would have to allow for a minimum of 15% of a town's total housing stock. So that is, just to wrap it all up, 50 acres at 15% total. This goes to the next step, gross density. So gross density in that district has to be a minimum of 15 units per acre. A community, an MBTA community may establish sub-districts within that new district, within the new multifamily zoning district. So you could have mini districts within the new zoning district. So you could have one that's 3 units per acre, 3 housing units per acre, and one that's 20. You could mix and match. But the state's requiring that overall the average is at least 15 units when you average it all out per acre. So the anticipated impact on Shrewsbury. I did mention it's a commuter rail community. According to the 2020 census, Shrewsbury has 14,966 housing units approximately. To comply, Shrewsbury would have to establish 1 or more by right multifamily zoning districts that total at least 50 acres and have a zone capacity for 2,245 housing units, or 15% of the 14,966 total. And I took a screenshot just so you believe me. This is right from the DHCD website as well, of 2,245. And they call out every MBTA community in the state. The draft guidelines do not do. It is not a mandate to construct 2,245 housing units, only a mandate to create a zoning district that would allow for that capacity to be built. There is no requirement that a town build all these units to its full capacity, neither in Shrewsbury nor any other community. The new law, just to emphasize, is requiring multifamily by right, but not necessarily housing production. Also, what it is not, this is not a different variation of 40B, which allows developers to bypass local zoning. As mentioned earlier, a development would have to go through, or may go through, which I assume we would do, site plan review by the planning board for individual projects. The by right zoning can include a mix of uses, so it could go over, and again, this is mix and match within an overlay if we wanted to. Residential and commercial, provided it's meeting that 15 unit per acre capacity. And as mentioned previously, I think was multiple zoning districts could be used to comply. The impacts of non-compliance aren't great. It means that we would not be eligible for any MassWorks grants. As many of you know, a MassWork grant paid for the improvements along Route 20 in front of the mixed-use market basket projects that's ongoing right now. We hope to wrap up this year, at least the street part of it. Local capital projects would be a no-go, and Housing Choice Initiative grants, which up until this year we had not been eligible for, but the planning department's very hopeful we will be categorize as one this year and be open to applying for funding for their grants as well. And DHCD did make it known last week at this webinar I mentioned that it may take into account other grants that they offer if we're not in compliance and could at their discretion deny us even applying for them or just tell us outright no. So that brings us to the timeline for implementation. As I mentioned before, this is a multi-month, multi-year process, and the draft guidelines are just that, draft guidelines by DHCD. As you can see on the timeline here, I put a nice fancy star there. This is we are here. We are in almost the middle of March. We're getting there. March 31st is when the public comment periods ends, and I'm going to explain how you can leave public comment. And on May 2nd, there's a deadline for every MBTA community to submit information about their community. And one of the requirements, I can't even click the submit button, I was told, until I did this briefing with this Board of Selectmen, so here I am. I think it was actually a good idea the state had. I would have probably been here anyways, explaining to you and giving you a heads up that this is coming. By the end of this year, the state is requiring that we submit an action plan to DHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development. That action plan is simply going to state the steps in our plan for getting this done. It's not to actually get it done or propose any zoning, just here are the steps that the town has outlined for us getting this done. And then the state has 6 months, which I think is a reasonable amount of time, maybe less, they'll get back to us to approve that action plan. And being a commuter rail community, the biggest benefit I see is that the town has until December 31st, 2024 to implement and adopt this new multifamily zoning district. We can talk at a different date about, again, as we come out with that action plan, what dates and benchmarks we want to hit along the way, but just knowing how we have annual town meetings in May and usually have one in October, we can imagine kind of how we might play that one out. Let's see, so future questions and considerations as we move forward in the months and years ahead is things to consider is zoning overlay or new base zoning district. How do we want to approach that? Just how much density do we want at 15 units per acre over 50 acres is only about 750 multifamily units. So would you want to increase the density within that 50 acres? Would you want to increase the acreage amount to get to that 2,200 that we're required to allow by right, housing units, excuse me. So location is an obvious one. And then of course, when we get to this part, what should be included in site plan approval requirements and standards, design standards, form-based zoning. We talked about it obviously at the prior for the town center about design requirements. So public comments are due to DHCD by March 31st, so this month. This is, when it says public, it means anyone. So it can be anyone watching at home. It can be any individual select person here, anyone on any other board. I'm going to be submitting comments on behalf of the planning board, or not planning board, planning department, I guess. And I do have some questions for them, and I'll just give you an example if it helps kind of get the wheels turning in your own heads. One is, as you saw on that earlier, I'll go right back to it, that earlier map, you can see we kind of have this like large sliver, it would appear, over our southern border, if you will, within that half-mile radius. If we're supposed to get half of our multifamily zoning district in there, it's going to be quite a challenge. You can see there's wetlands in this, even from the satellite. There's existing buildings. Interestingly, DHCD is not, at least according to the comments made at last week's meeting, and again, we'll know at the final draft of those regulations when they come out, I think in June, they're not requiring infrastructure to be in place. They're considering this kind of a future aspirational multi-family zoning district. So if a town doesn't have that, the infrastructure, water, whatever it is, set up, as we don't have a lot down in this area, we could still zone it as such with the intent that one day we will be able to get the funding. Mass Works is going to, they already told us, prioritize funding for these types of infrastructure projects to make it a reality one day. So one of my questions is, well, if we can't fit half of it into here, what are we supposed to do as a community? So that's one question I have for DHCD. And before anyone asks, WRTA is already out of the picture. The legislation, as it was told to us, is specifically for Mbta services. WRTA, so Worcester Regional Transit Authority, buses and the like don't count towards this, which we can have a debate about whether that was right or not, but maybe not tonight. So if anyone is interested in submitting comments, you can go to the website here, or you could likewise just do an internet search for MBTA Communities Public Comment in your web browser. And it will pop up and you can find it and submit it. So any questions, comments from any of you, and I'll do my best to explain them.
Mr. DiPaolo.
Or answer them.
Sound like you got that extra planning person just in time, huh?
Yes.
That was my wife's crack. So when it says you have to have the zone, obviously we don't have a lot of 50-acre parcels of virgin land. So it can be, it doesn't make any difference if there's already existing. No.
It doesn't make a difference, no.
So
Yeah, that was a question that was one of the first questions last week that was asked to DHCD. It can be on existing where there are structures existing.
So
today.
a little bit of this is feel good check, not for us. The legislation, the way it's written, it's kind of like feel good check the box. Some of it,
Yeah,
because you're not going to go into whatever neighborhood and expect people to tear everything down to build it. It just seems kind of silly.
No, the way it was explained to participants last week, which I thought was a reasonable explanation, was it creates kind of an incentive if you were to do like an overlay district. So say a place that has maybe a warehouse that's been there for 50 years, the owner might say, well, gee, they put an overlay here that allows for mixed use, provided I hit, to meet these density requirements. I'm going to tear down this old warehouse. It's worth my while now financially, and put a mixed use into this on this site. So kind of, there are several different angles that it seems the state's approaching that, and that was certainly one of them. And it does sound like they are trying, the state, trying to give communities flexibility, especially ours where we don't quite fit into it entirely as a commuter rail community, but at the same time, we're not so far outside that we're not. So, again, I think there's going to be a lot more clarity, and once DHC does wrap up their final regulations, which is why these comment period is so important to get comments out. So please submit comments because I want them to hear them. So I have plenty of procedural comments and questions for them.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Can you just clarify for me?
Yeah.
So you laid out the requirements, at least 50 acres in zone capacity for 2245. Do we not have any currently?
Multifamily zoning districts that, no, they're by special permit, all the ones we have.
All the ones we have.
Yeah, we looked through them all. The only exception to that is that in the town center district, when that was created, funny enough, because it's come up a lot tonight, developers could do up to 8 units in a mixed-use development in the town center with just site plan approval, but anything over 8 units would trigger a special permit. So it wouldn't ever meet the density requirements that they require with just 8 units.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other questions? Just have one request.
Yeah, sure.
If you could share the comments and questions that you have, that you're going to add to
Yeah,
this,
sure.
just to help us with our learning process
Absolutely.
as well.
Yeah. And if anyone at home wants to call, I will do the best I can at this point to answer the questions, or at least I'll send the state your questions.
No, thank you. It's in its infancy. Just actually one other question in terms
Yeah.
of, I mean, it's you have this timeline for implementation, but it's preliminary, so it seems like everything moves to the right. But do you have any idea what an action plan really will mean in terms of time and effort and cost? And Mr. DiPaolo had said, and in terms of having additional resources, but any idea what that means?
Yes, I think I do. Well, first, I just want to clarify, this timeline is not draft. This timeline is,
Oh, it's okay.
as far as I know, this is fact.
Okay.
The guidelines themselves are draft. What this means, and we're already working to get some funding and help for this. I think that's the first thing we're going to do. And I didn't put it in here because I didn't have that much space for these slides, but it has been broadcast to all the different MBTA communities that the state, all their grant programs are prioritizing applications for assistance with creating these multifamily districts.
Okay.
So we are going to go full steam ahead as a department and a town trying to get some of that funding, and I think we have a good shot at it. Also CMRPC, which is our Central Mass Regional Planning organization, is we're actually have already signed up with them to get some help through them as a regional effort. So there's going to be lending a lot of support technically. The state's also offering technical support online. I would say we would lay out, I think, an action plan. I think we'd be in a good position by the end of this year to lay out an action plan of what we intend to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think we would be doing the data collection, we'd be doing the different mapping all throughout most of 2023. And then by the end of 2023, early 24, have something, at least in my mind, to go to town meeting of May 2024. Shrewsbury's always been a very efficient place to work and live in. I've experienced here, so I think we're in a good place. We have some great people on board that we can meet that deadline, but at the same time, if for some reason it gets delayed, we'll still have then that extra 6-month or not even 4-month window to get to October for a special town meeting. So that's the goal, is to get some funding for assistance to get this together, and then we're going to have, we'll have meetings, we'll have public forums, we'll have more discussions about us. We'll have a whole public feedback process that I haven't thought out exactly how it's going to work, but it's there. But I'm confident we can do it. I think it's a long enough time frame that it really does give us amount of time to pull something together and engage the community and talk about this and come to some sort of consensus.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Just one.
Oh, Mrs. Cassidy.
So is the overall purpose behind this to just encourage additional housing to be created because there is such a crunch and a crisis as far as housing goes, not just single family homes, but other options for people that may not be such a financial commitment or burden or barrier? Is that what do you think the overall purpose would be?
Yeah, no, I think you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what the purpose is. Although I do think there's a separate part to it being MBTA communities. It's trying to go kind of low carbon footprint as well by being close to transportation. Mm-hmm. I think that is the other side of this.
Right.
I think we'd want to take that into account as we move forward as well. But I think the biggest purpose is to get those housing units where possible created by allowing this opportunity for developers. Now, as the states continue to emphasize, is just because we allow for it doesn't mean that it will happen. All of it or even some of it. It always depends on market situations, it depends on infrastructure, it depends on just so many different factors about whether something even gets proposed and built. It's always a long journey. So, but yes, that is a long way of saying yes, they are looking to increase housing stock. I'll leave it at that.
Right, and if I can just,
Sure.
And I'm just sort of thinking through, I actually caught the conversations with Hannah that Ms. Lass was on, thinking about that project that's coming up on the Pike, it's got a name, Alston something.
Yellowstone Multimodal.
The multimodal. Maybe this is in response to trying to get more people on MBTA and off the roads, because that's really going to be impactful, and I'm not sure that anybody really realizes how much it's going to impact communities even that are outside of Alston in general.
Right.
But it's going to be all of us trying to get around that area for a very long time.
Right, and it is, I mean, it's multi-pronged, and I think I'm really hoping that these final guidelines, once they're not draft anymore, do kind of give us a little more guidance as they're supposed to for how we can structure these, where we're going to put them, what kind of help there is. But certainly when we go forward with it, I'll be looking at that component as well. So that's from a transportation side.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. I hope that wasn't too much to
it's
digest.
A lot to learn still, at least from my standpoint, so thank you. Next item on the agenda, also under new business, is to review and act on the outdoor dining rules and regulations and application form. Mrs. Loss, do I hand this over to you?
Sure, I can start, and Mr. Cahill is available for questions as well.
Please don't leave yet, Mr. Cahill.
Oh, I can just,
Sorry.
I was just gonna sit there.
The
Oh, go
board
ahead.
has entertained over the past 2 years through the emergency regulations of the state to allow for outdoor dining for restaurants that do not require a special permit. And subsequently, at a previous town meeting, we actually relaxed the zoning regulations for restaurants in general and outdoor dining in general. And we understand that the emergency regulations related to outdoor dining will be lifted as of April of this year. And we thought that it would be prudent through staff and then with recommendations and review by the Board of Selectmen to come up with a variety of ways that restaurants could apply to the Board of Selectmen for an outdoor dining license. And I know that the board has reviewed the application and the rules and regulations several times. We've taken those comments under consideration, have made the appropriate changes, and we'd like to request that the board review that final rules and regulations and application form this evening in order for us to roll this out for restaurants who currently don't have a special permit that were operating under the emergency regulations, or new restaurants that would like to operate under a new outdoor dining rules and regulations.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. DiPaolo, I know you were reviewing this very closely.
Ms. Lass and staff did a great job addressing my comments and concerns. You could beat it to death forever, but I think it's in good form. From my perspective, I'm okay with it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? If not, is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
I've been moved and seconded, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Cahill. I'm sorry, I should have let you
that's
go
all right.
back to your seat. Next item is to review the draft warrant for the May 21st, 2022 annual town meeting. Mr. Mizikar.
Thank you, Mr. Samia. I just wanted to provide a high-level overview to the board at this point, kind of break down the articles by functional categories. We're in the process of developing the detailed articles themselves. At this point, maybe slightly higher than the last few years, but it looks like we'll have somewhere between 45 and 49 total articles that we would be presenting on the warrant. I'll just remind everyone that there's an upcoming deadline for citizens' petitions to be submitted to the town clerk's office. So the vast majority of the articles, as is traditional at the annual town meeting, relate to the financial operations of the community, setting priorities for the following fiscal year. And those make up at least half of the articles that we will be presenting. Of course, the Planning and Economic Development Department is proposing zoning bylaws changes and are working with a few developers that are interested in making particular changes to zoning districts. Additionally, we will consider 4 different articles to enhance taxpayer relief within the community, and those articles will be led by Principal Assessor Ruth Anderson. As we've matured our financial standing with regards to our pension system, the Retirement Board will likely, or has requested 2 articles to be placed on the agenda to increase the pension base that's subject to a cost of living increase on an annual basis. Currently, the town of Shrewsbury only increases the first $12,000 in any retiree's pension. That's the lowest level. The maximum level, I believe, is $18,000 per year, which would be subject to COLA adjustment. And the Retirement Board will likely recommend changing the base up to from $12,000 to $14,000. Also, from time to time, the Retirement Board recommends adjusting the pay for disabled retirees to 50% of the current positions that they retired from. Specifically, we have police and firefighters who are permanently disabled, and this would adjust the base of their pension to 50% of a current patrol officer or firefighter's salary. It just helps them. They were injured in the line of duty serving this community, provides them with additional income throughout their retirement. So those are two unique articles. We're considering taking appropriate steps to designate land that's currently held in tax title and moving it to various specific designations. A lot of work has been done by Selectman DePaula, the Public Lands Committee, also through our office, town manager's office, as we're looking to preserve the town's right and stave off adverse possession cases. There may be a couple pieces of land which we're reviewing to consider lease or disposition of for various purposes, but I'd like that to mature a little bit before we get into details. Department of Public Works Engineering Division, Town Engineer Andy Truman has proposed 2 different private streets to be accepted as public ways. And the vast majority, again, of the articles are really associated with the financial operations of the town, and we'll continue to work on the details associated with this warrant and prepare it for your execution at your March 22nd meeting, next meeting.
Thank you. Any questions?
Could I just have one
Mr.
question?
DePaula.
When will we see, I know most of these things are annual, so the motion itself isn't going to change that much, but when would we see proposed motions for some of these other ones?
We'll do our best to have, if we're going to recommend an article to you, at least the basic form of the motion, if it's a financial article, what the value would be, or if it is a list of properties, at least as many properties as we can provide to you, those tax title.
I mean, but it's like a couple weeks before well, actually, we might not see the motions until after we'll get a sense of the motion.
Right, you'll get a sense of the motions
Okay.
when you sign it, but
Right.
we won't have the full details until after.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Look forward to next meeting. So next item is to review and act on the partial street closure request from Andy Truman, Town Engineer, for a partial closure. Mr. Truman, good evening.
Good evening,
Welcome.
everyone.
Thanks for your patience.
Oh, no problem. It's been a long night, so I will keep it short. The record, Andy Truman, Town Engineer. This is a partial street request from Ricciardi Brothers. They are working on the Howe pump replacement. It was actually scheduled to start last October, but because of procurement issues, it got delayed till this year. So they are ready to start work. As some of you may know, the location of the pump station is awkwardly located on the corner of Howe Ave. So in order to, give them some safe working room and to allow for, traffic to continue, they're looking to close half of it. So they'll put the signage up ahead of time. I did include a divergence sign in the memo, but essentially most of the traffic around will be 2 ways, but we will limit traffic from Howe, basically just southbound. It will just be northbound off of Lake Street. Should be about a 7-week project, hopefully, all going well. They plan on, assuming they get approval tonight, to start putting up the message boards to give residents and users a heads up that it is coming. And obviously we will do our typical outreach to school department, fire and police departments and the residents. So happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Not, is there a motion? Thank you.
Move approval of the request.
Second.
Having moved and seconded, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Andy. Next item in the agenda is to review and act to disband the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. I'll hand this to Mr. Mizikar and Mrs. Cassavan, whoever wants to take that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, go ahead.
So board members, when the board establishes ad hoc committees, once the committee satisfies its charge as directed, the board disbands the committee for a number of reasons. It primarily gives individuals who served on that ad hoc committee the opportunity to serve on other committees and just not be bound in any way by public employee designation whenever you serve a committee. So this is traditional, as everyone will recall. We took the next step at the last meeting and signed off or requested that I negotiate a contract with a consultant, which we're in the process of doing. So with the DEI committee's charge satisfied, we're recommending that that task force be disbanded.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Is there a motion?
Move we act to disband the DEI committee, and I believe we should send them all a letter expressing our profound thanks for the great work they did.
I agree.
Second.
I've been moved and seconded, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously, and I echo that, and thank you to all the members who provided all of that hard work, particularly during challenging times in the midst of the pandemic. And look forward to our work that we'll undertake, particularly with the help of the consultant, and that should start very soon. Next item on the agenda is to review and act to approve this September 13th, 2021 minutes of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. Colleagues, that's in front of us, because rather than have this endless loop of meetings for a task force to keep approving its meetings to approve those minutes, it's in front of us for our review and approval.
Move approval.
Second.
I've been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. The next is to review and act on the one-day all alcohol license request of Pamela LeBeau of St. John's High School, 378 Main Street, for April 29th, 2022 for the delivery and storage of all alcohol, and April 30th, 2022 from 5 p.m. to 12 a.m. for the serving of all alcohol at a gala fundraiser event. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I've been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Now we're on to correspondence. Agenda item number 13, email dated February 17th from Edward Bombauer, 17 Flintock Drive, regarding historical preservation activities, so noted. Next item is email dated February 18th, 2022 from Leo and Bernadine Pies, 20 Redcoat Road, regarding Rails Beale School property, so noted. Next item is email dated February 19th, 2022 from Bernard and Kathleen Forletta, 22 Colton Lane, Beale proposal, so noted. Next item is a letter received February 23rd, 2022 from Diane Shea, Business Manager, Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, regarding fiscal year 2023, and that just set forth the allocation for our community, which I guess I'll find momentarily, but that's what that is. I see it as for Shrewsbury, it's $11,530.84. That's what that is for Shrewsbury's allocation, so noted. Moving right along. Next item is a letter received February 28th from Hannah Kane, 32 Main Circle, regarding Hannah Kane letter of resignation from the Finance Committee. Just want to extend our thanks to State Representative Kane, who served in that role for 8 years. She did an excellent job providing not only her business experience, but the experience representing us at the State House. So her skills will be deeply missed, but understand that she has a lot of obligations, so we wish her well and thank her again for her service. So that's so noted. Next item is a letter received March 1st, 2022 from moderator Jim Kane regarding the Shrewsbury Finance Committee. It is the appointment of Donna Largis O'Connor for the next 3 months to fill the remaining, or at least till June 30th, 2022. So noted. Next item is a letter received March 1st, 2022 from Minik Repetka, Highway Division Manager, regarding snow report on March 1st, 2022. There's 8 inches of snow on Friday, February 25th, and the total cost was $66,758.09, or $8,344.76 per inch for those at home keeping track. So noted. Next item is an email dated March 1st, 2022 from Barbara Kickham, 12 Tamarack Lane, regarding Beale development, so noted. Next item is email dated March 1st, 2022 from Ray and Kathleen Broussard, 61 Plainville Ave. There were a couple emails to us regarding building inspector and whether or not permits were needed. Mr. Mizikar, what's the status of that?
We're certainly working with the homeowner and trying to find the most palatable path forward to protect the future owner and satisfy the outstanding requirements, and we'll continue to work through that on behalf of the
board. Okay, thank you. So noted. Next item is an email dated March 3rd, 2022 from Lucy Pellin, 33 Brookdale Circle regarding rapid development tree loss, so noted. Next item is a letter received March 4th, 2022 from Michael E. Brandywine, Fletcher Tilton, PC regarding petition for zoning amendment for annual town meeting, amendment of zoning text relative to section 7A, height regulations, and amendment of zoning text relative to section 6A, the use regulation schedule, so noted. Next item is an email dated March 4th, 2022 from Shibu Matu of 89 Grace Ave regarding a pothole. Mr. Mizikar, if we had an opportunity to go over there at all, or if we could take a look at that.
This is a private way, but yes.
Oh, sorry. If we could, all right, then we'll just respond to him. All right, sorry, I didn't realize that, so we'll do that. All right, so next items 27 to 53 are all related to Beale, so noted, and then, so I'll take those in tandem, as well as items 54 through 59, which are all ZBA decisions, all dated February 28th, 22, so noted. So if there's no other action, questions, comments from the board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Have been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you for joining us. See you on March 22nd.